Hey folks, I'm here again with Alex Nahas, the inventor of WebMCP and all-around MCP rockstar. And we're going to talk a little bit about the launch we've got going on this week for the Zuplo MCP gateway. We're going to start off, I'm going to give you the 5 whys of the MCP gateway, and then Alex, who collaborated with us on building this, is going to talk a little bit about what's unique about the way we've built this and what it does with Auth, which is frankly the most complicated thing about building an MCP gateway. Okay, so I want to talk about the 5 whys of an MCP gateway, but just let's quickly orient ourselves to what is an MCP gateway. So when we think about an API gateway like Zuplo, we traditionally will put this here, we'll have what we call API consumers. So that is somebody that wants to consume your API, and then of course you've got your actual origin API over here, which is the back end. And so the consumer now goes via the API gateway and then goes towards the origin, and the API gateway can add all of those goodies like, rate limiting, auth, consistency, governance, observability, all of that great stuff. Now, when we think about an API here, what do we mean by API? We typically mean a REST API, maybe a GraphQL, hopefully not, but including a SOAP API. And notice, these are all just protocols of a form. So GraphQL is a type of RPC protocol. SOAP, literally the P stands for protocol. REST is loosely a protocol just based on HTTP, which is a protocol. That's what the P stands for in HTTP. MCP ends in a P. The P, it's just another protocol. It's just another way of doing APIs, right? It's just another way of expressing a communication between processes in compute. Now, Zuplo is great at this because MCP is built on the HTTP stack. Zuplo is, we think the best API gateway on the market, and now the best MCP gateway on the market. But there's a couple of other things that's interesting about this. When people deploy Zuplo, they're often deploying it in what we would call this way, outside in. So what that means is I have external users over here. These are usually, in most cases, like think about AccuWeather, one of our customers, have external users wanting to consume APIs that they have inside their business. Now, Zuplo is sometimes used inside out, where employees actually use the API gateway to reach external APIs or other internal APIs. The MCP gateway will definitely play in both areas. So will be used in both an outside-in scenario and an inside-out scenario. I'm actually going to focus on that last one just a little bit more here. So let's think about that. What does that mean? Well, if you think about being an employee of an organization, right, there's a couple of things we want to do. So in the world of MCP, let's imagine this is my MCP origin server. It might have all kinds of wacky authentication protocols. It might use API keys. It might use Auth. It might be unsecured. Believe it or not, that says unsecured. Anything could be going on there. It may have no observability built in. It might not have protections against prompt injection or PII leakage. This is sort of an ungoverned target for you to be using. So this might be MCP servers that you're using, maybe it's Stripe or Vercel or Linear or any of those MCP services. Maybe it's some of your own first-party data and services that you want to provide access to inside your organization. Now, if you deploy an MCP gateway, you're going to put that in front of that origin, and now all of your MCP, I'll call them consumers, you might think of them as MCP clients, whether they be internal or external, can benefit from these 5 whys. So what are the 5 whys? Well, number 1 is discovery. So where do your employees go to learn about the list of MCPs that are available to them? So with Zuplo, you can publish a catalog. It's part of our developer portal that can be locked down. It can be controlled by you and your admins to say who can see which tools, etc., who can see which MCPs. And so we provide a catalog that has a list of all of the MCPs available to your employees. So that's a place they can go to find out what tools can they actually use, what are they approved to use. The second is Auth translation or authentication. Now, We don't want your employees using API keys or basic auth or any of these wacky auth mechanisms. You always want to be using on the front end here your SSO, your IDP, your corporate identity product. And so with an MCP gateway like Zoopla, we take care of the authentication translation for you. They always sign in with their SSO credentials, with their corporate account, and then we take care of translating on the back end here whatever auth needs to happen. The third, though, is authorization, Auth. So what does that mean? Well, maybe your MCP server publishes a lot of tools, including some tools that might be destructive. You don't want all of your employees to have all of those tools. You might want to limit them to just read-only ones. In the case of like me using Stripe, I use the Stripe MCP server all the time, but I don't want any destructive tools, so I don't make any silly mistakes with my LLM. With Zoopla, you can build in an Auth layer. So one of our policies here allows you to filter which tools are used, so we can reduce the number of tools that are exposed to your employees. We can also do that based on role. Number 4, observability. If you're running this in the corporate enterprise, you need to know what is going on in the universe, have an audit trail of all actions performed against MCP servers. Zoopla, the MCP gateway here, can capture all that, and also gives you detailed analytics so you can see which MCP servers and tools are creating token pressure and costing you money, which employees are using MCP the most, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. You'll be able to understand what is going on in your MCP usage estate. And then 5th and finally is what we call guardrails or policies. So guardrails allow you to do things like take a look at the payload that's traveling through the gateway. And remember, this is Zoopla, so it is programmable. Everything in Zoopla is programmable. You can extend it and write your own policies. So we can use that to actually offer PII redaction policies. So make sure that PII never makes its way into the MCP server, or maybe out. Maybe you don't want one of your first-party services accidentally leaking PII data that would go into the LLM. That might be a thing you want to prevent. So Zoopla can prevent accidents like that in both directions, and can also look at results from the MCP server for things like prompt injection. So prompt injection is a real thing in the world of MCP, but happens the other way around. When we think about prompt injection, we're often thinking about someone injecting a prompt into the LLM that will get the LLM to do something we didn't want them to do. Well, actually, when you think about what happens with an MCP server, the response makes its way into the LLM, and that's another source of potential prompt injection. So again, you can run prompt injection detection here on this response, and that will help keep your estate safe. So that is the 5 whys of the MCP gateway. Now, Zoopla has invested a particularly long amount of time and effort into getting this one really right, because authentication is hard. So I'm going to hand over to Alex now, who's going to talk a little bit about authentication in Zoopla and why it's awesome.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. Yeah, I think the easiest way to understand why Zoopla is really helping out the Auth story, and like why gateways are needed in particular, is think about let's say you have a lot of developers at your company, and they're all using however many MCP servers, and they want to use internal services, but they want to use Claude Code to do it. This is a pretty common scenario we're seeing right now. And let's forget a gateway exists right now. You have your MCP origin, which is maybe an internal service for this one, and then you have Claude Code. And your developer wants to use the internal service with their Claude Code. What does your internal service need to do right now? They need to become an authorization server first, hook up with the IDP, all this stuff. They need to fulfill all the different parts of the OAuth MCP protocol. And then, that's quite a bit of work to do. And then if you need to make your API, ready for that sort of thing. Maybe it only accepts API keys, but you don't want to be putting API keys in each one of these in Claude Code and each one of these configs. At the end of the day, if it does all that, how do you know what your developers are doing? How do you know who's calling what tool? Now you have to instrument telemetry on each one of your internal apps, and that's going to be like a lot. Something that would have existed in maybe the web app side before. Okay, so a gateway gives you a lot. First of all, out of the box with the Zoopla MCP gateway, you get OAuth, the full protocol. It's purely stateless as well, so it'll be valid for the new version of the protocol that releases in July here. And it gives you, federates with any IDP that you have. We support things like Okta, Auth0, Ping Identity, a bunch of others. And then you can use that as the OIDC provider. And then that's how you log your users in, and then it will do all the other MCP OAuth things for you. And then to talk to the upstream origin server, it can speak MCP, it can speak MCP OAuth. We can, do token exchange in the gateway to get a token that this one would accept, or we can, host a API key in the gateway, and then this one doesn't even need to support OAuth at all.
Mm-hmm.
It's really, and then on top of all that, you get RBAC, because you have a logged in user here. You can scope down the tools they can see or their Claude code. If you think about like what an agent is right now, it's just a set of capabilities, maybe an identity, so what it can do, and then that's basically it, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, you pretty much have your entire, all of your, like you would for any sort of API gateway. It's kind of like the gatekeeper to your downstream services.
Yep. And in this case, whether they're first party or third party as well, if you want to do this for your Stripe and for your employees accessing it as well, we can take care of all that transaction as well.
And that's actually what's really exciting about Zuplo, because it does MCP on both sides, right? So this one, in this case we just talked about, this is an internal service, right? But let's say this is Stripe. So maybe your users log into Stripe and the Zuplo MCP with the same email, but these two don't trust each other. Stripe does not trust Zuplo, so you have to do another OAuth dance to go between them. Now, if you were going to do it directly through the MCP consumer, you have to go through all of the OAuth flow with Stripe's MCP and all this stuff, but then how do you put any sort of like observability or RBAC over what your users are doing? You hope that Stripe's scopes are good enough for you to scope down the tools you need. But if you put an MCP gateway in front of it, now we hold on to Stripe's token for that user, and then you can scope down the different capabilities that that we're showing from Stripe to the downstream consumer, and you can also see exactly what your users are using Stripe to do with their Claude code, right?
Awesome.
So yeah, it's pretty cool. There's one more thing, and it's exciting, but we're going to release this with Zuplo. It's called Cross-App Access. And this is powered by something called IDJAGs, or Identity Assertion Grants. And basically what that means is that Claude is a trusted client, right? Let's say Claude Code here. And we know that everyone in this relationship is under one IDP, right? So maybe your company uses Okta. And Okta knows about the MCP gateway, it knows about Stripe, and it knows about the client. So why shouldn't Okta be the one to say like, okay, we're going to give a token here to, let's say, the MCP gateway, Zuplo's MCP gateway, and then Zuplo should just be able to show that identity assertion grant to Stripe to say, oh, yeah, sure, you don't need to log in again. You just, because we both trust Okta, let's just use that, and you'll trust that. So yeah, and right now you need to see 2 login screens when you're trying to sign into Stripe through the gateway, one for Zuplo and one for the downstream, Stripe in this case. With IEJAX, you don't even have to see if you're logged in, like via SSO, you don't have to see any login screens. Your agent can just use the service. So it's pretty exciting. Yeah.
That is super cool. And that's going to make the gateway use case even more streamlined.
Exactly.
Awesome, Alex. Thanks so much. Thanks for helping with the launch.